The world's greatest mysteries of science and history. You're watching the MHS Network.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of MHS Network. My name is Coleman, and I have a very awesome guest with me. His name is Michael Mays. Michael, I know I said this earlier before starting the show, but thank you so much for agreeing to come on and talk about your work and your book that just came out, which, by the way, congratulations on. I've heard a lot of good stuff about it, and I'm currently waiting for it to come out on Kindle myself. So as soon as that happens, I'll be devouring it. So Michael, could you go ahead and talk a little bit about yourself, talk about your work, your research, talk about the Texas Cryptid Hunter blog that you run, and anything else that you'd like to throw in there?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a privilege to be here. My name's Michael Mays. I'm native Texan, grew up in East Texas, in the Piney Woods area of the state. Grew up hearing all kinds of stories about all kinds of fun stuff, and I guess just never outgrew it, so to speak, and continued to look into and investigate those things in my adulthood. I'm a member of and actually the chairman of the North American Wood Ape Conservancy, which is a Bigfoot research group based out of, most of our members are in Texas. We're actually got members spread out all across the country now, even a couple overseas. But most of our members are in Texas, Oklahoma, and main study area that we spend most of our time in is in the Ouachita Mountains of eastern Oklahoma. And that's the experiences that we've had there is what led to the book that, was just published.
Excellent. And so just to get straight into the book, I know you've written books such as Shadow Cats, which is about your research in regards to the big black cat sightings in North America. Patty as well, a children's book you wrote about the Patterson-Gimlin film, if I'm correct. Mm-hmm. And then you also have this new book as well over Area X and your research in Area X. What inspired that book? What brought that about? And what inspired you to want to talk about this? And how did Area X even come about? And along with anything else you want to add in there?
Okay. We'll kind of take the second half of your question first. How did Area X come about? In the early 2000s, we had three main areas of study. We were running a camera trapping project called Operation Forest Vigil, where we had camera traps set up in three different hotspots. One was on private land in East Texas along the Trinity River. Another spot was the Big Thicket National Preserve in East Texas, and the third spot was in the Ouachita Mountains of eastern Oklahoma. And the Area X name, it sounds real mysterious and spooky and all that kind of, X-Files like, and that was really not the intent. We named the three study areas X, Y, and Z. They just as easily could have been areas A, B, and C, but we went X, Y, Z, and through the years, we discovered that Area Z, the private land, that was kind of a bust, and we actually began to think that the experiences that had been reported to us there were probably fabricated. That probably was they were not factual. So we ended up dropping that area. The Big Thicket National Preserve in Southeast Texas, that was tabbed Area Y, and it was an area where we had a lot of interesting things happen. But we had to work with the National Park Service there, and various superintendents over the Big Thicket came and went through the years. Some were more amenable to our efforts than others, and you had to do this dance where you had to apply for scientific research permits, and there were lots of restrictions and things that we had to deal with there. And in 2011, a new superintendent came in that it was difficult to work with him, and he was clearly not a fan of ours. And so we chose to pack up and go. Well, they kind of invited us to go. Basically, they failed to renew our scientific research permit, so we had to leave there, which that was disappointing because there was activity there. So that left us with Area X. As it turned out, however, that place turned out to be by far the most active and interesting of the three anyway. And things were probably going to trend in that direction very quickly, regardless of what happened with the Big Thicket National Preserve. So when Operation Forest Vigil concluded in 2011, we were looking to do a kind of a new way of research. We were kind of like everybody else in that we were kind of weekend warriors. We would go out on a long weekend and we did all the things that most folks who are into this topic do. We would call blast vocalizations of known primates and suspected Sasquatch calls, the Ohio howl, the Tahoe scream, things like that. And we would, do wood knocks and all the stuff that most people do. And we would get responses, and it seemed like what we began to notice is that first night or two, we wouldn't get much of any activity at all. A lot of times, it was the latter half of the time we were there, sometimes the very last night that we were there, that things would get kind of crazy. And so we began to think about that. And, obviously there was no way that these animals knew, okay, it's our last night, so we want to make it memorable for them, that's ludicrous, right? So, but a theory was developed where we figured these animals have been around a long time and they've become used to people, human interlopers in their territory. And they've learned that people are going to stay a night or two, typical campers on a weekend or something, a holiday, and then they're going to leave. So there's no sense for them to show themselves, reveal their presence in any way. They just need to be patient and people will ultimately leave. It's only when people stay a little longer than that they began to, for lack of a better term, just kind of get tired of us and begin the effort to try to run us out. And it can start subtly with howls and roars and wood knocks and rock throws and things like that, and can escalate into banging on the cabins. If you're in a camper or something like that, that can happen. Shaking vegetation, again, the screams and the things like that in close proximity, that 99.99% of the world, when that happened, they're going to pack up and go. And the theory based on that was that, what if we don't leave? What if we stand our ground? Will they continue to escalate their behavior and maybe show themselves in an effort to run us out, scare us out of there? And so that was the hypothesis behind what we were doing, and we wanted to test to see if that would work. And that's what we've been doing now for a while. And so we, instead of having 10 or 12 people go out for a long weekend and on these, and I really don't like the term expedition, but for lack of a better one, to go out on an expedition with 10, 12, 15 people, the thought was, let's get 3 people per team to go out and stay for a week and be relieved by 2 or 3 more, and so on. And in that way, we could have a true long-term presence. And let's see what that does. If they start to act out because they're tired of our being there, will they continue to escalate until they show themselves and we can get the photos or video footage or whatever it is that we're looking for? So that's kind of how it all came about. And so at the conclusion of the camera trapping project, that's what we started in 2011. It was called Operation Endurance. And we went in there for about 45 days consecutively. We had people with boots on the ground in the valley, and some interesting things started to happen.
Right. And could you talk a little bit about some of those experiences that either you or the, other members, other researchers within the NAWAC have had since you've been researching Area X that you made? Obviously, I understand you don't want to maybe not want to go into too much detail. You want people to obviously read the book and find out for themselves. But is there any little details you could talk about? Maybe some encounters you've had that really stuck out to you or other members of the team?
Oh yeah, a lot of things have happened. And the thing that really has struck me is the thrown objects. I mean, it's there have been days where it's been almost continuous. Now, depending on where we started in 2011 was a privately owned piece of land with a couple of primitive hunting cabins on it, and they had metal roofs, the tin roofs, and these things would just get pounded day and night. Rocks, would fly down off the mountain and hit them. And I don't have to tell you or anybody listening that rocks don't fly or fall out of trees. They have to be thrown, they have to be tossed. And so there are really only two candidates for that to even be possible. Either you've got some people up there that are doing it, because you got to have a hand to throw a rock. A bear can't throw a rock. Or it's one of these animals. And we knew the location of this valley is so remote that we knew, there's only one way in and out. Nobody was going to get in there without our knowing that they were coming in. And it just, went day and night all summer long. So the idea that somebody was surreptitiously hiding up on the mountain side and throwing rocks periodically at us for 45, 60 days in a row, that just didn't seem very, very logical. So a lot of things like that. We've had the cabins struck. We've had what we would call a slap, sounded kind of like a meaty part of your hand slap a cabin. But we've had other times where it's almost like if you could picture a football linebacker or somebody, in full pads, rushing straight ahead at the wall, lowering their shoulder and just pounding into the wall. So much so that the whole structure shifted. And like I said, these weren't probably up to any kind of code anywhere. These cabins we were in, they were built by the owners themselves and had been there a long time. But things like if you had a shotgun or a rifle leaning against the wall, it would knock them over. They would fall over, and dust would come filtering down from the ceiling, and you could feel the whole structure shift. That'll get your attention. And a lot of weird vocalizations, whistles, screams, howls, what we have dubbed faux speech, kind of this garbled, a lot of people have called it samurai chatter, which I'll be honest with you, I was a big skeptic of that. I'll just tell you flat out. You may be familiar with the Sierra Sounds recordings. Mm-hmm. And the first time I listened to that, I thought that is the biggest bunch of nonsense I've ever heard in my life. That there's no way that cannot possibly be. I just totally blew it off. And I consider myself a pretty open-minded guy, but I said, there's no way that's real. And then, I've heard it myself up there, this kind of sound, and it defies explanation other than that it's this animal that we're trying to document. So there are a lot of things like that have happened. A lot of things that have validated claims of witnesses in the past, and then a lot of things that we were led to believe about these animals. I think that at least with this particular group in Area X, we found that that's not the case. For example, every book I read as a kid, a young man, and trying to get involved in this subject, it was believed that these animals were solitary in nature. And I guess that was probably based on the fact that most witness accounts included only one animal. What we have learned is that where there's one, there's almost certainly at least one other one close by. And that kind of goes against some of the, what was kind of accepted as kind of a baseline of knowledge, about these animals. So things like that. Other things, like I said, we seem to have verified them, their ability to mimic and it is pretty amazing. We've heard, there's a great example in the book of some guys, a tree had come down across the road to the study area, and they had a saw out, and they were cutting up the tree, and the sawing sound, and they stopped, and the noise continued, but from a spot in the woods, 50 yards away, it was this animal was, at least we assume this is what it was doing, was mimicking the sound of the saw. And we've had another example, like I said, rocks end up on roofs. And so we'll get up on the roofs, and when we arrive at the study site, and we'll sweep the roof of forest debris and see if there are any rocks up there. And we make sure it's clean, so that if we find one later in the week, we know that's new, that's fresh. And when you walk on these corrugated metal roofs, there's groaning and popping and this metallic sound. And remember, Alton Higgins was up there sweeping the roof, and some guys on the ground said, "Stop, stop, stop, stop." And he stopped moving. And from the mountainside, you heard this same sound coming from the mountain. And I have no idea how that's possible, but it would seem something up there was making the same sound that creaking, groaning, popping metal roof was making. And we've heard some other weird things, like the sound of a car door slamming when there are no cars, stuff like that. So, some things we seem to, at least in our mind, we seem to have verified, and other things we don't really think that's true. So it's been interesting in that regard.
Yeah, so I'd say I've heard that too, stuff about people hearing like chainsaw type sounds in the woods, and like you said, the car door shutting. I have no idea how they could possibly do that, but you hear that honestly more often than not. People talking about just weird metallic type sounds that seems to be in correlation with sightings and activities. So it's definitely strange. What was I going to ask? I want to ask you. So I know you kind of talked about that earlier. Talked about sound blasting and using, reported possible potential Bigfoot, or Sasquatch calls, or known primate sounds. Is that usually what you guys still kind of do? I understand you guys have multiple, operations, if you will, with I think Tag 7 and other things. But when you guys go out and do your research, is that usually what you guys do? Is that usually what you find to be the most successful, is sound blasting, doing calls, doing knocks, or is it something other than that?
We do it some. We don't do it as much anymore. I think, first of all, I think a whole lot more people are doing it. And we've actually been in situations, not in Area X, but in some other areas, where we would play a call and we would hear one back that was so identical that it made us wonder if there was another team of researchers from some other group out somewhere who had the same recording, and they were playing that back to us, things like that. So it's become much more commonplace for people to do that. So we don't do it as much as we used to. We do some organic calls. We've got some guys that with real good lungs that do the screams and the howls and the whoops and things like that. Things that, if they got you on camera doing it, you would look like a crazy person. But so we do some of that, some of the wood knocking, trying to entice some activity, if you will. But the main thing that we've found, the old adage is, you don't find them, they find you. You've probably heard something similar to that. And I think that's true. Is, go in deep, stay a week, and you'll get a visit, if there are any around. And so just by going to the study site, staying, you hike, you You do all the normal things a camper would do. The only difference is we're not oblivious to the possibility that these things are around. Most people, they go on a camping trip, a fishing trip, so the last thing they're thinking of. So they hear some wood on wood kind of sound. A lot of them just assume it's some kind of, if they think about it at all, it's just some sort of natural forest sound. We're just more in tune with the signs, so to speak, of what to listen for and look for. And of course, while we're hiking, we're looking for tracks and sign and scat and things like that. And we're listening. And, there are a lot of people out there that they hear a whistle. Oh, it's just a bird. Well, not necessarily. It depends on what kind of whistle it is that you hear. And because a lot of birds don't do certain things. And only certain birds are native to the area where you're conducting your research. So to learn those types of things has been very helpful. But mostly, we just go about our business there, but we're just vigilant. Now we do stay up. We'll work in shifts where somebody's up most of the night, and we conduct what's called overwatch. We have thermal units, and we scan the area continuously with those. And one thing we found that seems to be effective is we run what's called a cold camp. We don't build fires. We just literally sit out, in the dark. And the thinking is that's unusual human behavior. That's going to make them, what are those guys up to? And it's also going to force them to get a little closer if they want to take a look at what we're doing. And that technique seems to have worked pretty well for us. And we've had some really impressive thermal visuals. Unfortunately, in the early days, we didn't have thermals that were capable of taking video. So you just have kind of my word to go on for that has been remedied. And so if these kind of encounters repeat this summer in the future, we will have the video from it, because things aren't cheap, and we're a privately funded organization. We have dues and things, but we're not made of money. So but that's one thing that's worked for us, is that we stay up, we do conduct overwatch, we run those thermal scans, and again, we're just a little more aware, I think, than a common camper will be. But if you're there long enough, and if they're in the area, they tend to want to see what's going on.
Gotcha. And this is kind of just a random, kind of a dumb question, but honestly, I have to ask. You talked about whistles. I've heard of that myself. I haven't heard it, but I've heard people talk about that. I heard people talk about, and I might have experienced this, owl calls that sound like they're from an 800-pound owl. Is that something you have experienced, or people on the team have experienced in Area X?
Well, we've heard some sounds that we just were kind of baffled by. We have no idea what they were. I think you do have to be careful about assigning blame, so to speak. Everything is an ape, is a Sasquatch. There are a lot of folks out there that, they're behind every tree, and they're responsible for every weird noise out there, and that's not true. Foxes can make some god awful screaming noise. It'll scare you to death if you don't know what they are. An injured rabbit will squeal and carry on. It'll scare you to death if you don't know what it is. So you have to be careful with that. Sometimes an owl is just an owl. It's not something mimicking an owl. And so, but we have heard some things for which we can't account. That doesn't mean it was Sasquatch related necessarily, because we didn't see what made the call or the noise. But sometimes when you put it in context with things like, okay, something's been throwing rocks at us for an hour and a half, then we hear this, and then more rocks come. When you kind of do the big picture thing and start to kind of put it all together, it seems more likely than not that we could attribute it to one of these animals. But I do think you have to be careful with that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a slippery slope for sure. And like you said, you obviously have to make sure that not everything you hear is necessarily a Sasquatch. So, um, next question I want to ask, when it comes to what would you say if you had to, I guess, categorize it or try to categorize it, the type of the behavior from these creatures in this research area? Is it mostly aggressive? Is it mostly they're just curious about you guys? I mean, you guys have been researching there for a while. Has it
Mhm.
changed over time? And how, if you had, like I said, if you had to categorize that, how would you do that?
For the most part, I don't think you could call it. I think when people hear the term aggressive, they think, okay, a dangerous situation. Um, we've certainly we've been bluff charged several times. A lot of really intimidating roars, growls, scream, things like that, which I think you would categorize as intimidation displays, aggressive behavior. But there have been the vast majority of rock throws, and there have been a lot, thousands of them over the years, over the decade we've been in there. Only a handful do we feel like have ever actually literally targeted a person. Usually they're targeting a structure. Um, it's almost like, they're trying to make the loudest sound possible, almost like they equate noise level with intimidation or something like that. We have had twice, we've had two investigators that were struck by thrown projectiles. One was hit on the boot with a rock, and no big deal. We had another one that was hit with a big hickory nut, which I don't know if you know, when they're still in their casing, they're about that big, and they're 2 inches across and have a little weight to them. And hickory nut comes flying horizontally out of the forest, hits him right in the temple, and dropped him. He ended up being okay. But those are the only two that have actually made contact with investigators. We've had a couple other times where we were behind a cabin, and one of the investigators was, a rock strikes the cabin wall right next to them, or things like that. But for the most part, that's been the exception. They seem to be intensely curious. I think they're somewhat territorial, would be my guess. I think that's why they're keeping an eye on us. I think, and again, this is speculation. I have a personal theory that I think I know the area that home is, their living room, so to speak. And I think where we are is not it. I think we're in the vicinity. We're kind of on the periphery. And so you've got some that come to keep an eye on. And it's when you start to get a little close to, where mom and the kids are, so to speak, then I think that's where some of the behaviors might escalate a little bit. And I believe that's happened a time or two. And a few of those incidents are in the book. They're great. They're great stories, but and certainly frightening. But those are rare. Those are few and far between. Most visuals and experiences, it's rock throws, it's weird sounds, howls, calls. It's the visuals. But they tend to be very brief, and they're almost always retreating by the time you see them. And things like that. So mostly, I would say they're not aggressive. I don't think they're out to get us by any means. I think if they were, it would have happened a long time before now. Not to undersell that part of things. I think any animal can be dangerous if it gets cornered or you get between it and it's young or something like that. But I don't think that they're naturally predatory toward us. Now, I do think we have been able to identify a couple by color, and temperaments do seem to vary a little bit. I think that's just like people. You got some easygoers and you got some that aren't. I think too, I've often wondered if some of the more aggressive ones that have come closest, if they're not maybe the ape equivalent of teenagers that are, feel like they're bulletproof or have something to prove and things like that, and full of testosterone and that kind of thing. And they're coming and they're being a little more bold, and maybe as they age, they don't feel the need to do that as much. I don't know, but I wouldn't call them overly aggressive at all. I think, we've got a healthy respect for them. Obviously they could do a lot of damage to you if they wanted to, but so far we haven't run into that much at all.
And actually, that's a great leadway to the next question that I want to ask you, because you talked about some of your ideas on regards to their behavior, why they do certain things, maybe with noise, if that's, a possible form of intimidation or not. Have you developed any hypothesis in regards to any of their activity besides that? I mean, but the knocks, the vocals, everything, everyone has their idea. Is that a form of communication? Is that, this or that? Has NAWAC developed any, I understand there's no expert in this field, you hear that phrase a lot, but do you guys have any probablys in your mind in regards to why these creatures do certain things? Maybe not for sure, but are you pretty confident you have answers to some of these questions that people have been asking?
Well, we'll take the knocks, for example. I think it is a form of communication. There are times when I think we know what one is telling another. For example, we'll be in camp, and let's say it's Saturday. Usually teams swap out on Saturday. Somebody comes in Saturday and they'll stay a week, and they'll stay there till the following Saturday when the next team arrives. And it's very common to hear a loud knock, and then 5 minutes later, the new team drives in. It's almost like, hey, get away from the road, or hey, there's a vehicle coming, that kind of thing. It's a warning, and that has happened enough that we feel pretty confident that that's what, in that particular context, that's what's going on. Now, there have been other times when you'll hear a knock, you'll hear a reply knock from a different direction, and then you'll hear a third one from yet another direction. And, what are they saying to each other? What's the message there? I don't know. Just maybe, hey, I'm still here. Where are you? Maybe that's all it is. I don't know. But like I said, in the case of the early warning system, it's become, okay, they're almost here, because that is so common down there. We'll hear that knock, and then 5-6 minutes later, here comes the truck, and so in some ways, in that way, we figured out a little bit, but it happens in a lot of other situations where we're just not sure. We just don't know.
All right. So I kind of hate asking this question because I'm pretty confident I know the answer to this, but I just feel like I have to ask. Obviously, NAWAC takes a pretty scientific, grounded view on Sasquatch, wood apes. With your experiences and your research in Area X, has that at all been questioned at all by you or anyone else? Have you entertained the thought that there could be, some people call it woo, I guess, but the more, I guess, supernatural view of these creatures, or, interdimensional or whatever? Have you experienced anything that made you question if that could be the case, or is it pretty much confirmed that these are indeed just natural animals?
Well, first of all, I will say I'm a pretty open-minded guy. I mean, obviously, I'm out there chasing Bigfoot, right? So I believe in a lot of things. A lot of people would call kooky and woo, that in of itself. So we're all kind of in the same boat to some degree with that. Based on personal experience and the experience of my fellow group members, we've not seen anything that regarding behavior or any kind of characteristic that would make us think that there was anything other than a flesh and blood biological creature, behind this phenomenon. Now, I will say, maybe the strangest encounter I've had occurred a couple of summers ago. It was auditory in nature. It was not a visual. Tony Schmidt, a fellow member, and I were sitting out in front. Again, we're running a cold camp. We're just sitting in the dark. We've got thermals. And just to the west of the cabin, we hear something just beating the crap out of the ground. It's like they had a club or a stick or a log or something, just bam, 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 bam. And it sounded very, very close. And we swung the thermals over there to take a look. And we do have a metal, it's basically a carport. We call it the hooch. It's open on three sides with a kind of a metal top. There is a wall on the south side that comes all the way down to the ground. And it seemed to be in kind of that spot right behind that wall, which would make sense if something were sneaking up trying to get a peek at you, you know. We checked it out. We didn't see anything. We went back and sat down again. And a few minutes later, it was repeated. And whatever it was and whatever it was swinging, it's, if you've ever watched golf on TV, you hear the whoop as they start their swing, you know, right before contact's made. You could hear that sound of whatever it was they were swinging, cutting through the air before it struck the ground. You could hear that whoop, pam, whoop, pam. You could just hear it. It was high velocity, you know, stuff. Something was swinging, whatever it was, very hard, striking the ground. And it went on for over a minute, and we're scanning like crazy. It feels like it's right on top of us, and we can't see anything anywhere. It happened a third time, followed quickly by something striking the metal wall of that hooch. And I mean, it struck it hard. It just, that structure continued to vibrate and reverberate for 30 seconds after whatever it was hit it, you know. And it was just difficult to fathom, why can we not see anything, right? You know, and there are two ways you can go with that, right? You know, it was invisible, you know, and that's why, you know, it was cloaked. It was, and listen, you know, when you have an experience like that, because it sounded like it was not 20 feet away from us. It did. So you think it has to be something else to it. And so I understand why people can sometimes go that way. I don't condemn them for that or think ill of them for that. I think probably the answer is I'm more of an Occam's razor guy. You know, the most likely answer is probably the right one. It probably wasn't as close to us as it sounded. And the brush in there is, oh man, it's so thick in the summertime when everything's greened up. It's just, you know, the thermals can't penetrate it. So, and instead of it being right next to the wall, beating the ground and then hitting the wall with whatever it was swinging, it's probably a better guess. It was up the hillside a little bit close, but not as close as we thought, behind the brush. And then it's beating the ground and then through something as opposed to being right there, you know. So there's two ways you can go. And different people, I think, are wired to go that way more often or this way more often, right? It's just the way we are, right? So, so to me, everything we've seen fits nicely into what's known great ape behavior, if that makes sense. Intimidation displays, beating on the roots and trunks of trees. Chimpanzees do that. Screaming, roars, gorillas do that. Bluff charging, you know, all these different species do it. Now, what's interesting is that the wood ape or the Sasquatch doesn't seem to be more like this species of great ape that we know. It's kind of an amalgamation of behaviors of all of them. It's kind of like it has a little piece of all of them rolled into one. But if you just take that great ape umbrella, everything we've seen and observed fits in there with what other known great apes do. So my opinion is flesh and blood, incredibly intelligent animal, very furtive, very skilled, master of the environment, evasive, knows that we're bad news probably and seeks to stay out of the line of sight. But you know, again, I don't condemn anybody for thinking other things. Some of the things you hear about, mind speak, and I got zapped, right? I was out, and next day started to feel nauseous, and I woke up an hour late. Nothing along those lines has ever happened to anybody in our group. So now, like I said, I go where the evidence leads. If something like that were ever to happen, I might have to reconsider, that position. But no, as far as what I've personally experienced, what we've experienced, we're believers in the flesh and blood. It's an animal. It's a unique animal, and not like anything else out there, but an animal nonetheless.
Right. And I guess the Thermite, not that obviously my opinion in this doesn't matter at all, but I've heard something. I have a friend of mine who I talked to. He has his own YouTube channel, and I think he has a kind of developed this hypothesis or theory. I think that makes the most sense. And for me, I can accept it because I personally do believe in the metaphysical. There are weird, hauntings and stuff, hear about. And I think there are legitimate cases like that. I do, but I do agree with you that when it comes to Sasquatch or wood apes, this is a natural phenomenon. This is a flesh and blood creature. But I think a lot of times it's possible that people encounter true legitimate paranormal, whatever you want to call it, activity in the setting of the woods, and it gets associated with Sasquatch or wood ape or whatever. And that's where I think sometimes people can develop those ideas that this is a supernatural entity or whatever. And I think
I think the same thing happens.
Things,
I think the same thing happens with the whole UFO phenomenon. There was a UFO sighted in this area, and within the 48 hour period, someone saw a wood ape or Sasquatch. And so the human tendency is to want to somehow connect those two events. And I'm very wary of trying to explain one mystery with another mystery, if that makes sense. And that doesn't mean I've been wrong before about things, but just again, based on personal experience. And I think you can have an open mind toward the metaphysical, the paranormal, so to speak, and but everything that's weird doesn't necessarily fall under that umbrella. If
exactly,
that makes sense to you.
Agreed. Let's see here. So this one's kind of I know you've heard this question probably a million times. I had a family member ask me this question yesterday, but obviously you guys are experiencing these creatures in this area, in this research area. You're hearing these sounds, your love charges, everything, and these really remarkable encounters and evidence that your team is gathering. How do these creatures remain so elusive? How 7 foot tall, 8 foot tall giants in the woods, essentially. How do they remain undetected? How is it that we don't have the smoking gun evidence, per se, in regards to these creatures?
Well, that's the $1 million question. You get right down to it. If I knew the answer to that, I'd have the evidence, that I seek already. I just think they're hardwired to stay away from us. And that's why when they are seen, when their presence is noted, it's always in the most remote, hard to get to, wildest places, with a few exceptions here and there, where typically people don't go. And, I did this experiment. I was going to put it on the blog. I haven't done it yet. But as one of the questions we get is kind of tied to your question is, okay, you've had all these encounters. Why no pictures? Why no video? And it's a legitimate question, and I don't mind people asking it because I would ask it. The fact is, the first decade, really, we weren't trying to get pictures. We were trying to get a specimen. Because that's what we feel like it's going to take. We just feel like a picture. I mean, you look at what's out there now. What are the odds of getting video clearer than the Patterson-Gimlin film footage? Broad daylight, clear as day, there it is. And despite what a lot of people say, that footage has not been successfully debunked, and if that isn't good enough, what is anything we're going to get? How is it going to be better? If anything, these days, we often thought, Photoshop, with all the software that's out there, it's a lot easier to doctor things up now than it was back in 1967. So now we've kind of shifted of late, and I cover that in the later part of the book. We are going to shift our attention to trying to capture video and photographic evidence. That's going to become our main focus. We know it's not going to be enough to warrant official documentation from the scientific community, some sort of taxonomic ID being put on these animals. But what we do hope is it's enough to move the needle and get someone with more resources than we have, a National Geographic, a Discovery Channel, the Smithsonian, whoever, some university who has the resources, who has the funding to come and help us get whatever it is that we need to achieve that documentation. So we have shifted a little bit on that, and that's kind of where we are now. And like I said, it's a legitimate question, but getting back to what I was telling you, little experiment, if you're hiking down the trail or you're driving down the road in your car, you don't have necessarily a camera or a phone in your hand. And most people have their phones are locked, where you got to type in a code real quick to open them up. And even then, you open them up, you get to your home screen, you got to click on the camera icon. There are these steps that you have to take, and most sightings are so fleeting that they're gone. They're just gone. I think what may work and what we're going to try to employ is more like, I don't know if you're familiar with the guys that did the snow leopard research. Believe it was Nepal. It could have been Tibet, but it's somewhere over in the Himalayas. And they basically, these poor guys, these professional wildlife photographers, hung off a mountain in a camouflage blind. I forget for how many weeks, just week upon week upon week. I want to say it was close to 3 months, looking across a big ravine at another mountainside. And after 12, 15 weeks, whatever it was, they finally ended up getting, I think, 4 or 5 minutes of footage. But it was with continual vigilance on their part in these harsh conditions, kind of a 24/7 watch. And we just don't have the resources to kind of do that. And the other reason it hasn't been discovered is because really, statistically, nobody's looking. Deer hunter goes out. He's not looking for one of these things. I'm sure he's hoping he doesn't see something like that. I know guys that have said, I'll never go back in the woods again, after hunting for 30 years of their life. People aren't prepared for it. They're not intentionally out looking for it. Very few people are actually doing it. And as far as photographs with game cameras, against valid question, a lot of game cameras out there. The vast majority of game cameras, though, are set up overlooking a deer feeder, and usually not too far away from wherever the guy lives or a main road. Hunter doesn't want to be miles and miles into the bush and have to drag something out. Most of them don't go real far off Forest Service road or something like that. And so even though there's a lot of game cameras out there, that's what most of them are doing. They're security around somebody's house, or they're overlooking a deer feeder somewhere. And then the other part of that is, with our camera trapping project, we did the math one time. I don't recall exactly what it was, but we had 24 cameras or so in a 25 or 26,000 acre unit of the Big Thicket National Preserve. And we did the math. We took the cone of surveillance of each camera, and we added it up. We divided by the acreage, and statistically, we were watching 0% of the land, in the Big Thicket. So it's truly it's going to take just a bolt from the blue. Just, it's like probably the chances of winning the lottery are probably about the same. And I know I haven't won the lottery yet, but people do. Right? People have, and people do. So we're hoping that one day we will too.
Absolutely. And you pretty much already answered this already, talking about more of a focus on getting video evidence. But I wanted to ask you as we approach that hour mark, how do we move forward in research in regards to Sasquatch or wood ape research, and what's the future of Area X? What's the future of the NAWC? Have you guys looking at different or new research areas, or is the focus still going to be on Area X? And if so, what are kind of the new research techniques and the avenues moving forward for researching that area?
Yeah, that's a good question. When we first started in the group, we took sighting reports and we would go out on site where witnesses had encounters and talk to them, and that was very interesting and enjoyable, and a lot of these people really appreciated having someone to talk to that wasn't going to ridicule them, laugh at them, or anything like that. But the reason we were taking those reports was we were trying to establish a pattern of where they live. Where do these things live? Where are they? And then we kind of got away from doing witness reports for many years simply because we felt like we knew. We had done that. We'd done the research. We'd had the boots on the ground, and we had figured out where they are. And that remains true. Now, one thing about this group of animals in X is we've learned a lot about them and their behaviors, but by the same token, they've learned a lot about us and our behaviors. And a lot of the tricks we used in the past to elicit some sort of reaction or response on their part don't work anymore. They do make mistakes. They're not infallible, but they don't tend to repeat the same mistake twice. And so we've kind of opened it back up for witness reports again, hoping to do the same thing. And the ultimate hope would be to find somewhere similar to X in many ways that has for lack of a better term, an uneducated group of apes there that are not familiar with our bag of tricks. It's the classic, if we knew then what we know now, we could end this thing in a few weeks. We would have what we sought. And so if we could find a new area that we were confident where these animals were, I think we could do that. So once again, we're taking these sighting reports, and if we have and people who send these things in, I hope you're patient with us because we are limited with our numbers and resources. And if you're in Maine or Wisconsin, if we don't have a member, there, you're probably not going to get an on-site, visit. It's just, we just don't have the resources to do that. I wish I could do it full time, but nobody wants to pay me to do it yet. So, but if we get some accounts from the general area where most of us reside, and if we can narrow it down to another spot, because I'm not convinced that Area X is really all that unique. There's no telling how many Area X's are out there, but people just aren't. I mean, this place is remote. It's uncomfortable. It's boiling hot in the summer, freezing cold in the winter. It's full of black bears and venomous snakes. I've never seen anywhere that has more snakes than this place does. It's not close to anything as far as like, okay, there are no RV hookups. There's nowhere let's run into town and go to a movie. It's not like that, and most people aren't into the hardcore backcountry kind of experience. And so I feel confident there are other places like that. But it has to be on private land, probably, because, we kind of covered that ground earlier. It just makes things so much easier. Private land, and it has to be someone that has reached out to us, basically, because we won't know. We have done some studies of topographical maps and things from different areas around the country that we're just looking for similarities to the geography of Area X and see, okay, how many places are geographically similar? And, we've identified a few, but a lot of it, again, is, national forest land or privately owned, logging companies and you could go on down the list, but we're hopeful, but we're going to continue working X. Like I said, we are going to go back and we're going to revisit some of the old spots too in the near future, because it hasn't happened yet up there. We know they're there, but it's incredibly frustrating. It's frustrating for the people that follow us, and man, are they ever going to get it done? Well, think how we feel, and we've had a lot of people who were members for a long time who've kind of faded away because I think it's just not going to happen, and I am more optimistic. I think it will. I think we're going to get some intriguing evidence. We're a lot more prepared for it than we used to be as far as video equipment and thermals that take images and things like that. And I think at the very least, something like that's going to happen. I'm pretty confident of it. And, but if it was easy, it would have been done already.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess to throw my 2 cents in there, I think, whether or not anyone ever gets smoking gun evidence for these creatures, I think research that, that you guys do, the NAWAC and any other research group for that matter, that, gathers evidence. And because I went on the website and I've seen some of your guys' audio evidence and the rock throwing that you talked about. And I think it's amazing, honestly, to me. I love hearing stuff like that. And I just think it's an eye-opener for some people, for sure. I think people who are open-minded enough to consider that. And I think just, bringing more eyes on the research and whatever, I think is more than worth it.
And we've been disappointed that more mainstream scientist types haven't taken notice. You referred to Tag 7 earlier in the interview, and we were just incredibly excited about that and the data that we gleaned from that. For those who don't know, it was a nanotag radio transmitter that we feel confident that we got to adhere to one of these wood apes or Sasquatches. And we tracked it for months and months, and it doesn't match the home range of anything else that's supposed to be in the Ouachita Mountains. It was during the winter months when, a lot of people say, oh, it was just a bear, it was a bear. Well, bears are denned up, they're in hibernation, they're in torpor, during those January, February months. And that's when we were tracking this thing all over the place. And it just didn't fit the profile of anything that's supposed to be there. And here this is the kind of using, telemetry and tracking technology. And this is about as scientific as you get. This is the stuff you see on the Discovery Channel when they'll put tags, radio tags or collars and things like that on animals. And we think we managed to get one of these animals to tag itself. That's a whole probably separate interview, how we went about doing that. But we feel like we got one, and very little response. And so there's a chapter in the book about that. I'm hopeful that maybe some scientists that are not even aware of our group, because that's where we published the Tag 7 paper initially, that maybe out of curiosity, even if somebody gives you this book, as a joke, haha, look at this, go to the Tag 7 chapter, just read that, and then tell me, what you think. And so it's yet another effort to try to get some folks to help us, because I think we do know where they are. Our concern remains, I don't think the animals have anything to worry about from hunters. I don't think they have anything to worry about along those lines at all, because people have been hunting for forever. I think deforestation, development, the way the forest keeps getting kind of chopped up, it's not contiguous anymore. You get all these little islands of green, here and there. I think these things need large tracts of forest and not just pine forest. A lot of the loggers come in and they're logging in a much more responsible manner than they used to. It used to be just, be a naked mountain when they were done. It would just be totally stripped of everything. They're at least replanting and things like that now, but they're replanting fast growing pine. We call them slash pines down here. And, it's just not as rich an environment. I don't know if you've ever heard the term sterile forest. but the food stuff just isn't there with a coniferous forest as opposed to a hardwood deciduous type situation. And so when that transition from deciduous to coniferous takes place, that's not good. That's not good. And for a lot of wildlife, not just these animals, but so the race is against that. And that's our concern, because we lose, I don't know, there's a statistic out there about how many hundreds of acres of forest we lose every day or every month. And it would be a shame if these things kind of went the way of the ivory-billed woodpecker, because we didn't get the proof and nobody stepped up with the resources to try to help. So that's what we're trying to prevent.
Absolutely. And that's about as noble as it gets, because if something like this exists, which I believe it does, and many other people believe it does, it's great to share our stories and everything and talk about encounters. But ultimately, if we want to protect these creatures, then we have to step up with research and step up with wildlife preservation and supporting those causes. And
that's why things need to be done. It's asking the government to create a wildlife sanctuary, for example, for this endangered animal. Well, you got to prove the animal exists first. If we approach the government, we want to create this wood ape preserve, we might as well right now be asking for a unicorn sanctuary to be created, right? I mean, it's just, it has to be proven real first. Then you've got some ammunition. Then you got some people that'll listen. And but until that happens, one way or the other, we've got to keep on keeping on. And a lot of people say, why don't you keep going back? It's not happening because nobody else is going to do it. We need to keep trying.
So yeah, persistence is key when it comes to this. And I think eventually it will happen, thanks to people like you and people like the NAWAC and other researchers out there. Michael, could you tell us where can people find your book about Area X and your research there, and any other resources you'd like people to know about?
Sure. The book is available wherever online books are sold. So your Amazons, your Books A Million, your Barnes and Nobles, all those places will have them. The title of the book is Valley of the Apes, the search for Sasquatch in Area X. You could also go, I've got a personal website, Michael C. Mays, and Mays is spelled M-A-Y-E-S, Michael C. Mays, .com, and you can go there and hit the book, and you can email me directly if you want a signed copy or something like that. There's also a link that would take you straight to Amazon if you want to work a little faster that way. But basically wherever online stuff is sold, and if it does well enough, maybe you'll be able to go down to the corner bookstore and pick up a copy of yourself sometime. But at the moment, it's online.
Absolutely. And everyone, obviously, go check out these resources. We will provide links in the description, obviously, to Michael's book. So if you're interested, please go in the description box down below, click those links. And that's about it for me. Michael, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about your research and talking about your new book. And hopefully we can do this again, maybe sometime in the future. I've had a great time. And that's about it for me. So thank you, everyone, for watching. We will see you guys next time. Peace.